not very well known in the understanding or perception of Plato's Republic, but basically, Western philosophy is founded under duress, in a sense.
This is precisely the issue. What is the position of philosophy under conditions of political repression?
He says that as he gets older, he realizes that all of these other physical pleasures, like sex and eating and dancing, do not compare to the delight of having a conversation.
Plato's Republic, though it's known for many of its discussions on justice and other big topics, has a very interesting and strange and subtle pretext. It opens with a very strange scene where Socrates and Glaucon are walking back from the Piraeus to Athens, and they're suddenly interrupted by a slave boy of Polemarchus, if I recall correctly. And they go over to Polemarchus and his kind of entourage. He's got multiple people with him, which the text, makes explicit for good reason. And basically, Polemarchus demands a dialogue. Socrates and Glaucon say, basically, what if we don't want to? What if we'd rather not? We could just persuade you to let us go. And Polemarchus says, no. He says, you could try to persuade us, but if you tried to persuade us to let you go, I just wouldn't listen, Polemarchus says. And he specifically says, he uses a very strange phrase, which is translated into English as, you better make up your mind to that, is what Polemarchus says to Socrates and Glaucon. And so it's basically it's a threat of force, basically. He's got a larger number of people, which the text refers to. And he basically says, you must engage in a free philosophical dialogue with me right now. And if you don't want to, tough. And you could try to convince us otherwise. You could try to run away from us, but you're stuck. You have to have this, free expression of intellectual pursuit with us right now, whether you want to or not. And Socrates and Glaucon kind of just raise their hands and they're like, shrug, okay, I guess let's do this. And so people don't know the story very well. It's not very well known in the understanding or perception of Plato's Republic, but basically Western philosophy is founded under duress, in a sense. What do we make of this? What does that mean? What is Plato trying to tell us here? Why don't we start with you, DC?
Well, I mean, this is an element in Plato's dialogues, which is always emphasized very heavily, for example, by Leo Strauss and by his followers, that there's dialogical argument which is happening, but there's also a mise en scène, which is putting everything into its proper context. And as you say, Socrates and Glaucon, they're returning from Piraeus, which is the local port of Athens. They're accosted by a slave boy who has been ordered by his master Polemarchus. And Polemarchus, I mean, maybe it's worth noting, even the etymology of his name suggests a certain kind of order of combat. The slave boy orders Socrates to wait. He's been ordered to order Socrates to wait. So implicitly, one could wonder, whether, in a sense, Socrates is himself in somehow a position akin to that of a slave boy. And I think that it is ironic also. Polemarchus is somehow a friend of Socrates, and they're somehow jesting about whether, this is an act of duress or not. But in the broader context, of course, this is precisely the issue. What is the position of philosophy under conditions of political repression? Of course, the story of Socrates himself is precisely emblematic of this set of affairs, really, because he's attempting to philosophize in Athens. Ultimately, that modus operandi draws his own conclusion. In any case, we have, in the meantime, the Republic. Socrates goes to the house of Polemarchus. He begins a dialogue with his father, Cephalus, which means the head of the household. He's an old man, and he engages Cephalus in the question of justice, and this becomes then the theme of the dialogue. What is the situation of justice in a situation of political repression, potentially, but certainly political force?
Nina, is there a relationship between justice and truth? Many people would sort of assume this is the case. People would assume that this is the case, right? That speaking the truth would tend to bring justice into the world. And similarly, to establish justice would seem to bring people into a more truthful state. But I think you think about this question differently.
Well, before we get into the hard stuff, Justin, I think we should go in gently. That we're also talking about persuasion and the art of rhetoric, are we not? How do you convince someone that they want to have a conversation with you? It's quite difficult if people don't want to talk to you. And if they don't like talking in general, because they'd rather just see their enemies defeated. And I would just like to say, first of all, thank you for having us back. It's been a while. Um, it's very nice to speak to you two again. You're my dear
Yeah,
philosophical friends, and I missed you. I miss you when you're not here. And to think about this guy, right? There's this brilliant line from Cephalus, right? The old dude who is basically sitting there saying, like, we have to have a conversation. But why do we have to have a conversation? Partly, it's because he says that as he gets older, he realizes that all of these other physical pleasures, like sex and eating and whatever, dancing and so on, do not compare to the delight of having a conversation, right? This is really, really important, I think. So then the point would be something like, what's the relationship between the kind of persuasion, right, and the art of potentially diplomacy, right? So the art of dialogue as opposed to physical force, right, which again is like a founding question for every civilization, right? How do we transition from a state of war and the kind of fundamental violence that constitutes not just the founding of every state, but the ongoing reality, right? So the dialogue is the thing, if you like, where people get to express their disagreements, right? But you can't disagree with someone if they won't talk to you. If they've already decided that you're the enemy, if they've already said, we don't speak to you, we're going to censor you, we're going to shun you, then no one will speak to you. But in principle, as you know, I believe we should speak to everybody. And I think this is the philosophical position par excellence.